my stepsister moved into my house and stole my clothes and tried to split my college fund in half. I showed her why she could never take my place. My stepsister Chloe moved into our house in January when her mom married my dad. She immediately started telling everyone she was finally living the life she deserved after years of struggle. She said this was her chance to be somebody important and she wasn't going to waste it. I tried to welcome her because Dad asked me to make her feel at home. But Chloe didn't want to feel at home. She wanted to make it her home and push me out completely. The first week, Chloe moved into the guest room but complained it was too small. She said since we were both daughters now, we should have equal rooms. My room was bigger because it had been mine for 16 years, but Chloe said that wasn't fair anymore. She told Dad that keeping me in the bigger room showed favoritism. Dad said we weren't switching rooms because that would be disruptive, but he'd redecorate the guest room however Chloe wanted. She sulked for days and told her friends that I was hoarding the best room because I couldn't handle sharing. By February, Chloe had started using my things without asking. She wore my clothes to school, and when I confronted her, she said sisters share everything. I said we weren't really sisters and she needed to ask permission. She ran to her mom crying that I was rejecting her as family. Her mom told my dad that I was being cruel to Chloe, who just wanted to bond. Dad asked me to be more flexible and understanding. So Chloe kept taking my clothes, my makeup, even my jewelry, always saying we were family now. She'd return things stretched out, stained, or broken, then act confused when I got upset. She started inserting herself into traditions that had been just Dad and me for years. Our monthly dinner at Romano's became a group thing. Our Sunday morning walks included her. She even tried to take over reading announcements at Dad's company holiday party, something I'd done since I was 12. She said it was time for new traditions that included the whole family. When my birthday came in March, Chloe convinced her mom and my dad to make it a joint celebration. She said her birthday was just 2 weeks later, so it made sense to combine them. I'd always had my own party with my friends and the dinner Dad would cook. But Chloe wanted one big party where she could invite all her new friends from my school. She said separate parties would be wasteful and divisive. The joint party was awful because Chloe made everything about her. She gave a speech about how grateful she was to finally have the birthday she'd dreamed of. She opened my presents first, saying she wanted to save the best for last, meaning hers. She even blew out the candles on my cake because she said birthday wishes should be shared between sisters. My friends were confused and uncomfortable. Dad just smiled and said it was nice seeing us bond. Things escalated when Chloe found out about my college fund. Dad had been saving since I was born, and it was substantial. Chloe demanded equal money for her education. She said anything less was discrimination against her for not being a biological family. Her mom agreed and pressured Dad to split my fund in half. Dad refused at first, but they wore him down with constant arguments about fairness and family equality. I ended up keeping my fund only because my mom's parents threatened to involve lawyers since they'd contributed to it. That's when I decided Chloe needed to learn about boundaries the hard way. I started by being exactly the sister she claimed to want. I wore her clothes without asking, but I wore them better. She'd bought new outfits with her mom's credit card to impress people at school. I wore them first and got all the compliments. When she complained, I said sisters share everything, remember? I used her makeup and accidentally broke her favorite palette. I borrowed her phone charger and lost it. I ate the special food her mom bought just for her. Every time she protested, I reminded her that we were family now. Next, I started joining all her activities. She'd signed up for drama club to make her own friends. I signed up too and got the lead role she wanted. She joined yearbook committee, so did I, and became editor. Everything she did to establish herself, I did better. She complained to her mom that I was copying her. Her mom came to Dad saying I was bullying Chloe by not letting her have her own space. Dad pointed out that Chloe had insisted on sharing everything and doing everything together. He said I was just being the sister she'd asked for. The breaking point came during Dad's company gala in April. Chloe had been telling everyone she was the daughter of the company owner, conveniently leaving out the step part. She'd promised people she could get them meetings with Dad or internships at his firm. I let her dig herself deep, then introduced myself to all those people as the actual daughter. I explained that Chloe was new to the family and still learning boundaries. The word spread quickly that Chloe had been misrepresenting herself. People she'd tried to impress were angry about being misled. Chloe's face went white like someone had drained all the blood out of her body. I watched her eyes dart around the room, landing on each person I'd just talked to, seeing their confused and annoyed expressions. Her mom appeared out of nowhere and grabbed Chloe's elbow, pulling her toward the hallway that led to the bathrooms. Chloe stumbled in her heels trying to keep up. Lorraine's face was tight and angry as she whispered something harsh in Chloe's ear. Dad stood near the bar holding his drink, frozen in place like someone had paused him. His eyes moved between the hallway where Chloe disappeared and the group of business people near the windows who were now talking in low voices and glancing his way. I could see him trying to decide what to fix first, his daughter's mess or his company's reputation. The satisfaction hit me like a warm wave spreading through my chest, but right behind it came this heavy feeling of dread. I knew what was coming when we got home, and it wasn't going to be pretty. Jet walked over to me holding a glass of wine, his smile stretched tight across his face like a rubber band about to snap. He cleared his throat and told me he appreciated me clearing up the family roles. He mentioned that Chloe had promised him his company would get priority consideration for a contract bid next quarter. I felt my face get hot and apologized for any confusion she'd created. I suggested he should talk directly with Dad about business matters instead of going through family members. Jet nodded slowly and said he'd do that, then walked away toward where Dad was standing. 3 more people from Dad's company came up to me over the next hour. A woman in a blue dress said Chloe had offered to set up a meeting about expanding her department. A man with gray hair mentioned Chloe had hinted she could get him an introduction to Dad's overseas partners. Another guy around Dad's age said Chloe had told him she was basically running parts of the company already and could fast-track his proposal. Each time I apologized and redirected them to Dad. Each time they looked more annoyed and embarrassed that they'd believed her. Dad eventually came over and took both me and Chloe by our arms, steering us through the crowd toward his office at the venue. His jaw was clenched, so tight I could see the muscles jumping under his skin. I'd only seen him this angry maybe 3 times in my whole life. He shut the door behind us and turned on Chloe immediately. He told her that lying to his business contacts was completely unacceptable. He said she'd created real professional problems he'd now have to spend weeks fixing. His voice was low and controlled, but you could hear the anger underneath like thunder rumbling. Chloe burst into tears, those big dramatic sobs where she could barely breathe. She said I'd humiliated her on purpose in front of everyone. Dad looked at me and I just shrugged because I wasn't going to lie about it. I had done it on purpose. She'd been lying about who she was for weeks and somebody needed to stop her. Dad rubbed his face with both hands and told us we'd talk more at home. Chloe kept crying and saying it wasn't fair, that I'd ruined everything. The car ride home felt like it lasted 3 hours, even though it was only 20 minutes. Nobody said a single word. Lorraine sat in the back seat with Chloe, making these little sniffling sounds while she rubbed Chloe's back. Chloe had her face buried in her mom's shoulder, still crying but quieter now. Dad's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He stared straight ahead at the road and didn't look at any of us, not even in the mirror. I sat in the passenger seat watching the streetlights go by, feeling this weird mix of victory and worry churning in my stomach. I'd wanted Chloe to face consequences for all her lies and boundary crossing. I'd wanted her to see that she couldn't just waltz into my life and take over everything. But now that it had happened, I felt anxious about what would happen when we got home. Lorraine was definitely going to explode at me. Dad would probably try to make peace between everyone. It was going to be a disaster. The next morning I came downstairs before school and found Lorraine waiting for me in the kitchen. She was standing by the counter with her arms crossed, still wearing her bathrobe. Her face was red and puffy like she'd been crying or hadn't slept. She started in on me immediately, saying I'd deliberately sabotaged Chloe's attempt to fit into the family. Her voice was shaking with anger. I poured myself cereal and told her calmly that Chloe had sabotaged herself by lying to people. I pointed out that I'd simply told the truth about who I actually was. That wasn't sabotage. That was honesty. Lorraine's face got even redder and she called me cruel. She said I'd been undermining Chloe since day one, that I'd never given her a real chance to be part of this family. I laughed at that because it was so backwards. I reminded her about Chloe stealing my clothes, invading my traditions, trying to take my college fund, and lying about her role in Dad's company. I asked her which part of that was me being unwelcoming. She didn't have an answer, so she just glared at me and walked out of the kitchen. Dad stayed home from work that day, and I could hear him on the phone in his office for hours. His voice carried through the house even though he was trying to keep it down. I heard him apologizing over and over to different people. He explained that his stepdaughter had gotten overeager about her connection to the company. He said he took responsibility for not setting clearer boundaries about family and business from the start. Between calls, I could hear him sighing really loud and opening and closing desk drawers. The tension in the house was so thick you could almost see it hanging in the air. Chloe stayed in her room with the door locked. Lorraine moved around the house, slamming cabinet doors and drawers, shooting me dirty looks whenever we ended up in the same room. I tried to stay out of everyone's way by doing homework in my room, but I could feel the anger and stress pressing down on the whole house like a heavy blanket. At the school, Evangeline found me at my locker before first period. She wanted to know what happened at the gala because I'd been texting her updates throughout the whole Chloe situation. I explained how I'd exposed Chloe's lies to all of Dad's business contacts. Evangeline's eyes got wide and she said Chloe had it coming after everything she'd done, especially stealing my birthday party. But then she asked if I felt bad about it at all. I stood there thinking about it for a second. Part of me felt totally justified because Chloe had crossed so many lines and never faced real consequences. But another part of me felt a little guilty about how public and humiliating it had been. I admitted to Evangeline that I did feel bad, just a little, even though Chloe deserved to face consequences for her behavior. Evangeline nodded and said that made sense, that I could be right about what I did and still feel weird about it. Chloe didn't come to the school for 2 days after the gala. She texted the attendance office saying she was sick with a stomach bug, but I knew she was just hiding from the embarrassment of everyone knowing she'd been lying. Lorraine brought meals to her room on a tray like Chloe was some kind of invalid. Every time I walked past Lorraine in the hallway or kitchen, she'd glare at me like I was the worst person alive. Dad tried to keep things normal by making dinner and asking about my homework. but I could hear him having these tense whispered conversations with Lorraine behind their bedroom door at night. Their voices would get louder and then quieter, going back and forth for what felt like hours. I'd lie in bed listening and feeling guilty, but also still angry about everything Chloe had done to me first. When Chloe finally came back to the school, she avoided me like I had some contagious disease. She walked past me in the hallway without making eye contact. At lunch, she sat with a completely different group of girls on the other side of the cafeteria. I noticed people whispering and looking at her, then looking at me, then whispering more. The story of what happened at the gala had somehow spread through school. Maybe one of the catering staff had a kid who went here, or maybe someone's parent worked with Dad. Either way, everyone seemed to know that Chloe had been caught lying about her role in Dad's company. She looked miserable sitting there picking at her food while the girls around her talked. Her shoulders were hunched forward and she kept her eyes down on her tray. I felt this little stab of guilt in my chest despite everything she'd done to me over the past few months. After drama club rehearsal, Raven pulled me aside near the stage curtains. She said she'd heard there was some family drama happening and wanted to make sure I was okay. I gave her a vague explanation about blended family growing pains and learning to set boundaries. Raven nodded like she understood, but then mentioned that Chloe had seemed really upset during auditions earlier that week. She asked if that was related to whatever was going on. I just told her we were working through some boundary issues as a family and left it at that. Raven squeezed my shoulder and said if I ever needed to talk, she was there. I thanked her and grabbed my backpack, heading out to where Dad was waiting to pick me up. Dad called the family meeting on a Thursday evening when the house had been silent for 4 days straight. He knocked on my door around 6 and said we needed to talk, all 4 of us together in the living room. I followed him downstairs where Lorraine and Chloe were already sitting on opposite ends of the couch. Dad took the armchair and I sat in the other one, keeping maximum distance from everyone. Lorraine started before Dad could even open his mouth. She said I owed Chloe an apology for what I did at the gala, that humiliating her in front of all those people were cruel and unnecessary. I felt my hands grip the armrests and told Lorraine that Chloe owed me an apology for months of stealing my clothes, taking over my traditions, lying about her role in Dad's company, and trying to split my college fund. Lorraine's face went red, and she started listing every time I'd been unwelcoming since January. She brought up how I refused to share my room, how I made Chloe feel like an outsider, how I never tried to include her in anything. Dad interrupted and said Chloe had overstepped boundaries repeatedly, that she'd taken things without permission and misrepresented herself to his business contacts. Chloe started crying with these loud sobs that made her whole body shake. I kept going because I was done holding back. I listed every single piece of clothing she'd stretched or stained, every tradition she'd invaded like our Romano's dinners and Sunday walks, every time she twisted situations to make herself look like the victim. I mentioned the birthday party she hijacked, the announcements at Dad's holiday party she tried to take over, the way she told everyone at the school she was the daughter of a company owner when she'd only been in the family for 3 months. Dad rubbed his face with both hands and looked older than I'd ever seen him. He said we all needed to cool off. The next week turned our house into separate territories. Chloe and Lorraine stayed on their side, eating dinner at 7 when Dad and I ate at 6. They'd use the living room in the evening, so Dad and I would watch TV in his office. I'd hear them moving around upstairs and wait until they went to their rooms before going to the bathroom. Dad caught me in the kitchen one night when I was making a sandwich after everyone else had gone to bed. He leaned against the counter and told me he was struggling to balance his marriage with protecting me. His voice sounded tired and he had dark circles under his eyes that hadn't been there before Chloe moved in. I told him I understood it was hard, but I wasn't going to apologize for defending myself. He nodded and said he knew, that he just wished there was a way to make everyone happy. I watched the stress aging him, adding lines around his mouth and making his shoulders slump forward. Lorraine brought up family therapy on Sunday morning while I was getting ready for my walk with Dad. She cornered him in the hallway and said they needed professional help, because clearly they couldn't fix this themselves. Dad agreed immediately, probably desperate for someone else to solve the problem he couldn't handle. I heard him through my door telling her he'd find someone that week. When he knocked to get me for our walk, I asked if we were really doing therapy. He said yes, and asked if I was okay with it. I told him I was skeptical, but willing to try if it meant actually establishing boundaries instead of just hoping Chloe would magically respect them. Chloe refused at first when Lorraine told her about the therapy plan. I heard them arguing in Chloe's room about how she didn't need a therapist to tell her she was wrong. Lorraine convinced her by saying it was a chance to explain her side to someone neutral, someone who would finally hear how unwelcoming I'd been. Dad found someone named Lila who had experience with blended families. Our first session was the following Wednesday after school. We drove there in complete silence, Lorraine and Chloe in the back seat, Dad and me in front. Lila's office was in a building downtown with beige walls and generic landscape paintings. We sat in her office as far apart as possible, me in a chair by the window, Chloe and Lorraine on a small couch, Dad in another chair between us. Lila had gray hair pulled back in a bun and wore a cardigan that looked soft. She asked each of us to describe the main problems from our perspective. Lorraine went first and talked about how I'd rejected Chloe from day one, never giving her a real chance to be part of the family. She said I was territorial and unwilling to share anything, I went next and explained Chloe's aggressive behavior, how she took my things without asking, invaded my traditions, and tried to claim equal access to resources that weren't hers. Dad said he just wanted everyone to get along and find a way to live together peacefully. Chloe cried again and said she just wanted to be part of a real family after years of struggling with her mom. Lila listened to everyone without interrupting and then said, "Blending families requires time and mutual respect, not forced instant bonding." She looked directly at Chloe and asked about taking my clothes. Chloe wiped her eyes and admitted she thought that's what sisters do, that they share everything. Lila explained there's a difference between sharing and taking without permission. She said joining activities is fine, but dominating them and pushing someone out isn't. Chloe looked down at her hands and didn't respond. Lila asked about the gala incident next. I explained that Chloe had been telling Dad's business contacts for weeks that she was his daughter, leaving out the step part and promising people meetings and internships she had no authority to arrange. Dad confirmed this created real professional problems for him, that he'd spent hours apologizing and clarifying to people who felt misled. Chloe insisted she was just trying to feel important and didn't think anyone would care about the exact family relationship details. Lila said misrepresenting yourself to advance socially or professionally is a serious issue that goes beyond normal blended family struggles. Before we left, Lila assigned homework for the week. She told Chloe to return any of my belongings she'd taken and ask permission before borrowing anything in the future. She told Lorraine to acknowledge that I have a right to maintain some separate traditions with my dad. She told Dad to schedule dedicated one-on-one time with me that doesn't include Chloe. She told me to stop retaliating by copying Chloe's activities. Everyone nodded, but I could see Lorraine's jaw was tight and Chloe was still crying. The homework compliance was mixed over the next week. Chloe brought back a pile of my clothes to my room on Friday, but when I went through them, several pieces were missing. When I asked about my blue sweater and black jeans, she claimed those were actually hers, even though I recognized them from my own closet. I didn't push it because at least I got most of my stuff back. Dad scheduled our Sunday morning walks as just the two of us again. No Chloe or Lorraine invited. I quit yearbook committee since I'd only joined to spite Chloe anyway, and I didn't actually care about it. Lorraine made a comment at dinner about Dad and me having special time together, her voice sharp, but she didn't explicitly object like Lila had told her not to. Our second therapy session was the following Wednesday. Lila asked about the college fund conflict that had come up during our first session. Dad explained that my fund was established before I was born, with contributions from my mom's parents, making it legally separate from any family assets. He said even if he wanted to split it, he couldn't because my grandparents would take legal action. Chloe argued it still wasn't fair that I have money for college and she doesn't, even though she said she understands the legal reality now. Her voice got higher as she talked about how she's worked just as hard in the school, and has dreams too, but no way to pay for them. Lila leaned forward in her chair and suggested that Chloe and Lorraine should look into scholarship opportunities, since there were actually quite a few available for students in their situation. She said Dad might also consider starting a separate education fund for Chloe going forward, something built specifically for her rather than trying to divide something that already existed. Chloe's face showed she was listening, but I could tell she wasn't thrilled about the idea. She'd wanted access to my fund, not the work of applying for scholarships or waiting for a new fund to grow. But she nodded slowly and said she guessed that made sense. Dad immediately agreed to match whatever Lorraine could put into a new fund for Chloe, which honestly was more generous than he needed to be. Lorraine looked surprised but grateful, and she reached over to squeeze Dad's hand. Chloe wiped her eyes and thanked him quietly. The session wrapped up with Lila scheduling our next appointment and reminding us all to keep working on the homework from last week. In the parking lot after therapy, Dad walked me to my car while Lorraine and Chloe headed to theirs. He put his hand on my shoulder and told me he was proud of how I'd handled everything in there. I felt my chest get tight because I'd been worried he was mad at me for the whole retaliation thing. He said my methods weren't ideal, and we both knew that. But he understood why I'd felt backed into a corner. He admitted he should have set clearer boundaries with Chloe from the very beginning, instead of just hoping everyone would naturally adjust and figure things out. I told him I knew this whole situation was hard for him, trying to make his marriage work while also protecting me. I said I didn't want to make him choose between Lorraine and me because that wasn't fair to anyone. He pulled me into a hug right there in the parking lot and said I'd never have to worry about him choosing, that I was his daughter and nothing would change that. We stood there for a minute and I felt better than I had in weeks. Back at the school on Monday, I started noticing things were different with Chloe. She wasn't hanging around my lunch table anymore or trying to join conversations with my friends. Instead, she'd found a group of girls from her English class, and they seemed to actually like her. I watched her across the cafeteria one day, and she was laughing at something one of them said, looking relaxed in a way I'd never seen before. She wasn't performing or trying to prove anything, just being herself. We passed each other in the hallway between classes, and she gave me a small nod. Nothing friendly, but not hostile either. Just acknowledgement that we existed in the same space. The change was weird, but also kind of a relief because the constant tension had been exhausting for everyone. Evangeline pulled me aside after last period on Wednesday with this curious look on her face. She said Chloe had asked to sit with her group at lunch earlier that week and had actually been really nice about it. Not pushy or trying to take over the conversation like before, just genuinely wanting to be included. Evangeline said Chloe had asked questions about people and listened to the answers instead of making everything about herself. I felt surprised hearing that, because it sounded like a completely different person than the Chloe I'd been dealing with for months. I told Evangeline it was totally fine if she wanted to be friends with both of us, that I wasn't going to make her pick sides. Evangeline smiled and said she appreciated that because she'd been worried about the whole situation being awkward. She said she wasn't taking sides, but she was glad I was being mature about it. Our third therapy session came around the following week, and Lila focused on teaching us communication strategies. She had us practice expressing what we needed without making accusations or attacking each other. It felt awkward and forced at first, with all of us stumbling over our words and trying to follow her formula. But then something shifted when Chloe started talking about why she'd acted the way she did. She admitted she'd felt really insecure about her place in the family, and didn't know how to just exist without proving she deserved to be there. She said she overcompensated by trying to claim everything as hers, because she was scared of being pushed out or forgotten. Her voice cracked when she talked about always feeling like she was on the outside looking in at other families. I sat there listening and realized I'd never actually thought about what it was like from her perspective. When Lila turned to me, I acknowledged that some of my retaliation had been petty and designed specifically to hurt Chloe rather than just protect my boundaries. I said I'd wanted her to feel as bad as she'd made me feel, which wasn't really about boundaries at all. Lorraine spoke up next, and her voice was shaky when she started. She admitted she'd encouraged some of Chloe's behavior because she'd wanted her daughter to have all the opportunities and the lifestyle she couldn't provide before marrying Dad. She said watching me have everything Chloe had always wanted made her desperate to even things out somehow. Lila pointed out gently that security and belonging can't be forced or taken from other people, that it has to be built through real relationships and trust. Dad jumped in and said he should have been way clearer about family dynamics and expectations from the very start, instead of just hoping things would magically work themselves out. He admitted he'd avoided difficult conversations because he didn't want conflict, but that avoidance had actually created way more problems than it solved. Lila asked each of us what a successful blended family would look like from our perspective. I said I wanted separate spaces and traditions alongside some shared family activities, room to maintain what Dad and I had built over 16 years, while also creating new things together. Chloe said she wanted to feel included without erasing anyone's past, or pretending the family had always been this way. Dad said he just wanted everyone to get along and respect each other without constant fighting and tension. Lorraine said she wanted both of us girls to have equal opportunities and support, even if the specific resources looked different. Lila wrote all of this down and said these were actually really compatible goals, that we weren't as far apart as we probably felt. We spent the last part of the session creating an actual written agreement about boundaries. Lila had us each contribute specific things we needed, and she typed it all up on her laptop. Chloe would keep her room exactly as it was and wouldn't touch any of my belongings without explicit permission first. I would maintain some solo traditions with Dad, while also participating in new family activities that included everyone. Both of us would get equal support for our goals and dreams, even if the specific resources were different. Everyone committed to direct communication, instead of manipulation, or going behind each other's backs. We all signed it at the end, even though it wasn't a legal document or anything. It just felt important to have something concrete we'd all agreed to. The week after we established the agreement, something small but significant happened. Chloe knocked on my bedroom door on Thursday evening and asked if she could borrow my blue sweater for a date she had that weekend. She actually asked instead of just taking it, and she promised to return it clean. I said yes, and she thanked me genuinely before leaving. The next day, the sweater appeared on my bed, washed and folded neatly with a little note that just said thanks. I stood there holding it and feeling like maybe we were actually making progress. Later that week, I was in the kitchen doing homework when Chloe came in looking stressed about her math assignment. She didn't ask for help, but I could see she was struggling with the same type of problem I'd mastered last year. I offered to explain it, and she looked surprised but accepted. We spent 20 minutes going over the concepts, and she actually got it by the end. We weren't friends exactly, but we were learning how to exist in the same house without everything being a battle. Dad took me to Romano's on Sunday. Just the two of us like we used to do before Chloe and Lorraine moved in. We sat at our usual table by the window and ordered our regular meals without even looking at the menu. He asked how I was really doing with everything. Not the therapy answer, but the actual truth. I admitted it had been way harder than I expected, that some days I still felt angry about how much had changed. But I also said I thought we were making real progress, and the house didn't feel like a war zone anymore. He reached across the table and took my hand, saying he was sorry he hadn't protected our relationship better in the beginning. He promised to maintain our special traditions going forward no matter what, that Chloe and Lorraine joining the family didn't mean erasing what we had. I squeezed his hand back and told him I loved him. We finished dinner talking about normal stuff like my upcoming exams and his latest project at work, and it felt like coming home to something I'd been missing. The next Monday at the school, I'm walking past the cafeteria when I hear Chloe's voice through the open door. She's talking to someone from her drama class, a girl I don't know well. I slow down without meaning to, staying just out of sight. Chloe says blending families is way more complicated than anyone tells you. She says she made a lot of mistakes trying to force her way into a family that already existed without her. The girl asks what she means, and Chloe explains she tried too hard to claim everything as hers instead of respecting what was already there. It's not exactly an apology, and she doesn't mention me by name, but it's the closest I've heard her come to admitting she did things wrong. I stand there for a few seconds processing what I just heard. Part of me wants to walk in and say something, but I don't. I just file it away as progress and head to my next class. It feels like maybe she's actually learning something from all this mess. Our fourth therapy session happens that Thursday, and Lila shifts the focus to rebuilding trust. She asks each of us what we need to feel secure in this family going forward. Lorraine goes first and says she needs to know Chloe won't be treated like a second-class family member. Dad says he needs everyone to communicate directly instead of going behind each other's backs. Then Lila looks at Chloe and asks what she needs. Chloe takes a long breath and says she needs to know she's actually wanted here, not just tolerated because her mom married my dad. She says she needs to feel like she belongs instead of always wondering if everyone wishes she'd never moved in. Lila nods and turns to me. I think about it for a minute before answering. I say I need to know my relationship with Dad won't be erased or pushed aside to make room for Chloe. I need to know the history and traditions we have still matter, even though the family structure changed. Dad reaches over and squeezes my hand, telling me that will never happen. Lorraine looks uncomfortable but agrees that both relationships are important. Lila makes us all commit out loud to making space for everyone's needs, and we do, though it feels a little forced. At dinner that Friday, Lorraine brings up starting a new tradition that's just for the blended family. She suggests Friday movie nights where we rotate who picks the film each week. She says it's neutral territory that doesn't replace anything Dad and I already do together. Dad agrees immediately, probably relieved to have something positive to focus on. Chloe looks uncertain but says, okay. I'm skeptical, but I agree too because it seems harmless enough.
Nope.
We try it that same night after cleaning up from dinner. Chloe picks the movie since it was her mom's idea, and she chooses some comedy I've never heard of. We all sit in the living room with popcorn and drinks, spread out across the couch and chairs. The first 20 minutes are awkward with everyone sitting stiff and quiet. But then something funny happens in the movie and Dad laughs, which makes Lorraine laugh, and then Chloe and I are both laughing too. By the end, we're all actually relaxed and making comments about the ridiculous plot. When the credits roll, nobody jumps up to leave right away. We sit there talking about our favorite scenes and laughing about the stupid jokes. It feels like the first genuinely comfortable family moment we've had since Chloe moved in. Not forced or tense, just normal. Drama Club performs our spring show the next week, and I'm nervous about opening night. I've been practicing for months, but having people watch is different from rehearsing. Dad and Lorraine both come to watch, sitting in the third row center. Chloe sits with them instead of with her friends, which surprises me. I peek through the curtain before we start and see her looking at the program. During my scenes, I can hear people laughing at the right moments and clapping when I deliver my big speech. I spot Dad in the audience beaming with pride. What shocks me is seeing Chloe clapping too during my scenes. Not just polite golf claps, but actual enthusiastic applause. After the show, when I come out to the lobby, Dad hugs me and tells me I was incredible. Lorraine says I was really talented and she enjoyed the whole performance. Then Chloe walks over and tells me I was really good up there. Her voice sounds genuine instead of competitive or fake. I thank her and mention I heard she's trying out for the fall musical. She confirms it with cautious enthusiasm, saying she's nervous but excited. I tell her she'll do great, and I mean it. The whole interaction feels surprisingly normal. Our fifth therapy session focuses on what challenges still remain now that we've made progress. Lila asks me first, and I mention that Lorraine still sometimes automatically takes Chloe's side in conflicts without hearing both perspectives. I try to say it without sounding accusatory, but Lorraine's face tightens anyway. Lila asks her about it directly, and Lorraine admits it's her protective instinct kicking in. She says she spent years being Chloe's only defender, so it's hard to break that pattern, but she agrees to work on hearing both sides more fairly before making judgments. Dad goes next and acknowledges he sometimes avoids addressing issues directly because he doesn't want to rock the boat. He says he knows that makes things worse in the long run. Lila points out that avoiding conflict doesn't prevent it, just delays it until it explodes bigger. Chloe admits she still gets defensive when she feels criticized, even if the criticism is fair. I say I still struggle with feeling territorial about my relationship with Dad. Lila reminds us these patterns won't disappear overnight, but awareness is the first step to changing them. During that same session, Chloe brings up that some kids at the school still whisper about the gala incident when she walks by. She says it bothers her more than she wants to admit. I feel a flash of guilt hit my stomach because I caused that. Lila asks me how I feel hearing that, and I admit I could have handled the whole exposure more privately instead of doing it publicly at Dad's work event. Chloe looks surprised that I'm acknowledging it. Lila asks what I could do differently now to help the situation. I think about it and offer to clarify to anyone who asks that the whole thing was a family misunderstanding that's been resolved. I say I'll make it clear we're working things out and people should stop gossiping about it. Chloe doesn't say thank you, but she nods slightly. Dad looks relieved that I'm willing to help fix the social damage I created. Lorraine still looks wary but doesn't object. The next week at the school, I get my chance to follow through. Some girl from Chloe's English class makes a comment in the hallway about the gala drama while I'm standing nearby. She doesn't realize I can hear her telling her friend that Chloe tried to pretend she was more important than she actually is. I walk over and interrupt them. I say it was a family misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion, and it's been resolved. I tell them we're working things out as a family, and people need to stop spreading gossip about it. Both girls look embarrassed and mumble apologies before walking away quickly. Later that day, Evangeline tells me Chloe heard about what I said from someone who witnessed it. Evangeline says Chloe looked really surprised when she found out I defended her. I shrug and say it was the right thing to do since I'm the one who created the mess. The next day in the hallway, Chloe and I pass each other between classes. She doesn't say anything, but she makes direct eye contact and nods at me. It's brief, but it feels like acknowledgement, maybe even gratitude. I nod back and keep walking. Dad calls me into his office at home one evening and tells me he's starting a college fund for Chloe. He explains he made an initial deposit that's generous but not equal to mine. He says it makes sense given the different timelines since my fund has been growing for 16 years. Lorraine is contributing what she can from her salary too. Dad asks if I'm okay with it, and I tell him honestly that I am. Chloe deserves to have college money, and it's not coming from my fund, so it doesn't affect me. Later, I overhear Chloe talking to Dad in the kitchen, thanking him for treating her like a real daughter, even though she's not biologically his. Her voice cracks a little, and I can tell she's emotional about it. Dad tells her she is his daughter now, and he wants to support her future. I walk away before they see me listening, but I feel something shift inside. Maybe we really are becoming a family in our own weird way. At our 6th therapy session, Lila asks if we're ready to reduce the frequency of meetings. She suggests moving from weekly to every other week since we've made significant progress. Everyone agrees we've come a long way, even though we're definitely not perfect. Chloe says she feels more stable about her place in the family now. I say the house doesn't feel like a war zone anymore. Dad and Lorraine both look relieved that things have calmed down. Lila reminds us that blending families takes years to fully mesh, and what matters most is the commitment to keep working on it. She says setbacks are normal and we shouldn't panic if we have rough patches. We schedule our next appointment for 2 weeks out and leave her office feeling lighter than usual. On the drive home, Dad suggests we all get ice cream to celebrate our progress. Nobody objects, so we stop at the place downtown and sit outside eating cones in the spring evening. It feels almost normal. Romano's becomes a monthly family dinner for all 4 of us instead of just Dad and me. We go on the first Friday of every month and everyone takes turns picking what to order. But Dad and I keep our Sunday morning walks as our private time. Just the 2 of us like always. He makes it clear to Lorraine and Chloe that this is non-negotiable, and they respect it. Meanwhile, Chloe and Lorraine start their own tradition of Saturday breakfast at a cafe downtown. They go every week and come back with pastries for everyone. The parallel traditions feel balanced instead of competitive. Nobody is trying to take over anyone else's special time. We each have our own relationships within the bigger family structure. It's not perfect and some days are still tense, but we're figuring out how to share space without erasing each other. I catch myself thinking that maybe this blended family thing might actually work out after all. My birthday comes up in late May, and I bring it up at dinner one evening. I tell Dad I want something small this year. Just my friends. No big combined thing like last March. Lorraine's fork pauses halfway to her mouth, and I can see her forming an objection. But Chloe speaks first and says that's fair. Her birthday can be separate too. Dad looks between us and agrees, suggesting a family dinner for all 4 of us the weekend after my actual party. Lorraine nods slowly, and the tension I'd been bracing for never arrives. The planning feels easy after that. No arguments or guilt trips. I text my friends about coming over on my actual birthday, and everyone confirms. Chloe asks what day it is, and when I tell her, she says she'll make sure to be out that afternoon to give me space. I thank her and mean it. The gesture surprises me because a few months ago, she would have insisted on being included. My birthday arrives on a Saturday, and Chloe leaves right after breakfast like she promised. My friends come over around noon, and we spend the afternoon watching movies and eating pizza on the back patio. Nobody asks where Chloe is or makes it weird. We just hang out like normal teenagers celebrating a birthday. Evangeline brings cupcakes she made herself, and they're actually good. We laugh about stupid stuff from the school and make plans for summer. It's exactly what I wanted, low-key and drama-free. No speeches about deserving this moment, no stolen spotlight, no forced family bonding. Just me and my actual friends having a good time. Chloe texts around 5 to ask if it's okay to come home, and I tell her yes. She returns with takeout from my favorite Thai place as her contribution, which is thoughtful. The family dinner happens that Sunday evening at Romano's with all 4 of us. Dad orders my favorite pasta, and Lorraine suggests we share an appetizer. Chloe seems relaxed instead of competitive, laughing at Dad's bad jokes and asking me about the party with my friends. After dessert, she hands me a small wrapped box. I open it to find a gift card to the bookstore downtown, with a card that says, "Happy birthday from your stepsister." The acknowledgement of our actual relationship instead of forcing the sister label makes me smile. I thank her genuinely, and she seems pleased. Dad and Lorraine exchange a look that says they're relieved this went well. The dinner ends without drama, and we drive home listening to music instead of sitting in tense silence. Our 7th therapy session happens the following week, and Lila starts by asking each of us to share one positive change we've noticed. Dad goes first and says the house feels calmer lately, that he's not walking on eggshells anymore, wondering when the next fight will explode. Lorraine says both of us girls seem happier and less stressed than we were a few months ago. Chloe says she feels more secure about her place in the family now, that she's not constantly worried about being pushed out. I say I don't feel like I'm constantly defending my territory anymore, that I can relax in my own home again. Lila nods and writes notes in her pad. She asks about our goals for the future, and whether we still need regular therapy every other week. Dad suggests maybe we're ready to reduce the frequency now that things have stabilized. Lorraine agrees, and Chloe and I both nod. Lila reminds us that setbacks are normal, and we shouldn't panic if we have rough patches. She says the important thing is, we've learned communication skills and established boundaries that work for everyone. We agree to move to monthly check-ins rather than bi-weekly sessions. She tells us her door is always open if conflicts escalate again, but she's confident we have the tools to handle most issues ourselves now. We schedule our next appointment for a month out, and leave her office feeling lighter than usual. Dad suggests ice cream on the way home, and nobody objects. We sit outside the shop eating cones while the evening gets cooler. It feels normal instead of forced. School ends for the summer in early June, and the house dynamic continues to improve bit by bit. Chloe and I aren't close friends, but we can have regular conversations now and even joke around sometimes. She asks my advice about summer job applications one morning while we're both in the kitchen. I help her polish her resume at the dining room table, pointing out where she should add more detail about her theater experience. She takes my suggestions without getting defensive and thanks me when we finish. It feels good to be helpful, rather than competitive. Later that week, she helps me carry groceries in from the car without being asked. Small things like this keep happening and they add up. We're figuring out how to share space without constantly fighting over it. I catch myself thinking that maybe we're actually becoming some version of family in our weird way. Dad announces at dinner one evening that he's planning a family vacation for late July. A week at a beach house he found that has room for all of us, plus some extra space. He shows us pictures on his phone of the place with its big deck and view of the ocean. I'm cautiously hopeful, rather than dreading it like I would have months ago. Chloe suggests we each invite one friend for part of the week so we have our own support systems. She says it might make the trip easier if we're not in each other's space constantly. Dad and Lorraine look at each other and agree it's actually a smart idea. I text Evangeline that night to ask if she can come for a few days, and she says yes immediately. Chloe invites someone from her drama club. The planning feels balanced instead of like a battle over resources. Sunday morning, I go on my walk with Dad like we've been doing again since therapy started. We head down the usual route through the neighborhood, and he tells me he's proud of how mature I've been through this whole process. He admits the first few months of the blended family were rougher than he anticipated. He says he made mistakes in handling it, that he should have set clearer boundaries from the start instead of hoping everyone would naturally adjust. I tell him I made mistakes too with my retaliation strategy, that copying everything Chloe did was petty even if it proved a point. He says we're all learning and improving though, that the important thing is, we kept trying instead of giving up. I agree, and we walk in comfortable silence for a while. The morning air is warm and the neighborhood is quiet except for birds and sprinklers. These walks with just the two of us keep our relationship strong even as the family expands. I'm glad we protected this time together. Chloe gets accepted to a summer theater program she applied for, and she's actually excited when she tells us at dinner. She shows me the acceptance letter and I congratulate her sincerely. She worked hard on her audition and deserves the spot. Lorraine suggests we all go out to celebrate, both Chloe's acceptance and my successful spring show. We end up at a nice restaurant downtown and Lorraine orders appetizers for the table. Dad makes a toast to both of us and our different accomplishments. Chloe smiles at me across the table and it doesn't feel forced or competitive. It feels like a real family moment where everyone is genuinely happy for each other. We talk about the program schedule and what Chloe will be learning. She asks me questions about backstage stuff from my show and seems interested in my answers. The dinner goes well and I realize I'm not faking enjoyment anymore. Our monthly therapy check-in happens in June and Lila asks if we feel ready to graduate from regular sessions. We all look at each other and agree we've reached a stable place with established boundaries and better communication. The house isn't perfect, but it's functional now. Chloe and I have our separate spaces and activities, plus some shared family time. Dad and I kept our special traditions while building new ones with everyone. Lorraine has backed off from pushing instant sisterhood and accepted that relationships take time. Lila reminds us her door is always open if we need tune-up sessions down the road. She says she's confident we've built a functional blended family foundation. She tells us we should be proud of the work we've done. We thank her and leave her office knowing this is probably our last regular appointment. The drive home feels different, like we're closing one chapter and starting another. The family vacation in July goes better than I expected. We pack up Dad's car with everyone's stuff and drive to the beach house. The place is nice with big windows facing the water and enough rooms that we're not cramped together. Evangeline arrives on the third day, and Chloe's friend shows up the same afternoon. Having them there creates a buffer that helps. Chloe and I can do our own things with our friends without it being weird. But we also find stuff we enjoy together. One morning, Chloe suggests trying paddleboarding, and I agree to go with her. We rent boards from a shop near the beach and spend the morning figuring it out. She falls off more than I do at first, and we both laugh about it. The ocean is calm and the sun is warm. We paddle out past the waves and just float for a while, talking about random stuff. It's the first activity we've genuinely enjoyed as a pair without any competition or tension. We go paddleboarding 3 more mornings that week, and it becomes our thing. There are a few tense moments during the vacation when someone gets annoyed or we disagree about plans. But we handle them with the communication skills we learned in therapy instead of letting them explode into fights. We talk through issues and compromise. By the end of the week, I'm surprised to realize I'm not counting down the days until we leave. Back home after vacation, Chloe finds me in the kitchen unpacking groceries and mentions she's nervous about starting junior year. She says everyone at the school already knows each other and she's worried about fitting in. I stop putting away cereal boxes and look at her. She's fidgeting with her phone case and won't quite meet my eyes. I offer to introduce her to some people before school starts and show her around campus. Her head snaps up and she stares at me like I just spoke another language. She asks if I'm serious and I say yes. I tell her I can take her around next week and point out the good lunch spots and introduce her to a few people who aren't in my main friend group, but are nice. She smiles and thanks me, and it's genuine, not the fake sweet voice she used to use. I realize I actually want to help her succeed now instead of watching her struggle. The shift surprises me, but it feels right. Dad takes me to Romano's the following week for our monthly dinner. We sit in our usual booth by the window and order the same things we always get. He asks how I really feel about Chloe now after everything that's happened. I think about it while the waiter brings our drinks. I tell him honestly that I don't love her like a sister yet, and maybe never will. But I respect her more now, and I'm glad we figured out how to live together peacefully. He nods and says that's actually a very mature and realistic perspective on blended families. He tells me not every blended family becomes like the ones on TV where everyone loves each other instantly. Sometimes the best outcome is mutual respect and peaceful coexistence. I feel relieved that he gets it and isn't disappointed I don't have stronger feelings for Chloe. We eat our pasta and talk about other things, and it feels normal again. In August, Chloe knocks on my bedroom door and asks if I want to go school shopping together. She says we're both going to be juniors and it might be fun to shop as a pair. I agree, and we drive to the mall the next day. We wander through stores trying on clothes and giving each other honest opinions about what looks good. She picks out a blue dress that suits her, and I find jeans that actually fit right. She doesn't try to copy my style anymore, and I don't feel competitive about who looks better. We're just 2 teenagers shopping and laughing about the weird mannequin poses and overpriced accessories. We stop for smoothies and sit on a bench talking about teachers we hope to avoid and classes we want to take. It feels normal in a way our interactions never have before. On the drive home, she thanks me for coming with her, and I tell her it was actually fun. Lorraine pulls me aside one evening when Chloe is upstairs and Dad is in his office. She says she wants to thank me for being patient with Chloe and giving the blended family a real chance. Her voice is quiet and sincere. She admits she pushed too hard at the beginning for instant bonding and made things worse. She says she wanted so badly for Chloe to have a better life that she forced things that needed to happen naturally. I appreciate the acknowledgement and tell her I understand she was trying to give Chloe opportunities she didn't have before. She nods and her eyes get a little watery. She says she's glad we're all in a better place now and she hopes we can keep building on the progress. I tell her I think we can and mean it. When school starts in September, Chloe has her own friend group and activities separate from mine. I see her in the hallways between classes and we wave or say hi. Sometimes we eat lunch at nearby tables, but we're not joined at the hip. She sits with girls from her theater program, and I sit with Evangeline and my usual group. The separation feels healthy rather than hostile. We're each living our own lives while sharing a home. I hear through Evangeline that Chloe is doing well in her classes and people like her. She stopped trying to be me or compete with me. She's just being herself, and it's working for her. I'm genuinely happy about that. At our follow-up therapy session in October, Lila is impressed with how far we've come in 9 months. She sits back in her chair and looks at all 4 of us with a smile. She notes that we've moved from active conflict to peaceful coexistence to cautious cooperation. She asks if we feel the family is stable now, and we all nod. Dad says the house feels calmer than it has since January. Lorraine agrees and adds that both Chloe and I seem happier. Chloe mentions that she feels more secure about her place in the family. I say I don't feel like I'm constantly defending my territory anymore. Lila says we should be proud of the work we've done. She reminds us that we're not the perfect blended family from TV shows, but we've built something real and functional. She suggests we move to check-ins every few months instead of monthly sessions. Everyone agrees we've reached a stable place. For Thanksgiving, we host Lorraine's parents for the first time and Dad's parents visit too. I was nervous about the extended family dynamics and spent the morning helping Dad cook while worrying about how it would go. But everyone behaves well when they arrive. Chloe's grandparents are kind to me and ask about my classes and drama club. My grandparents are polite to Chloe and compliment her on the centerpiece she made for the table. We all sit down for dinner and pass dishes around like a normal family. The conversation flows easily with stories and jokes. Dad and Lorraine look relieved that no one is causing problems. It feels like we're presenting a united family front to the outside world. After everyone leaves, Dad says that went better than he expected. I agree and help him load the dishwasher. In December, Chloe gets the lead in the winter musical and comes home excited with the script. She finds me doing homework in the living room and asks if I'll help her practice her lines. I agree, and we spend several evenings running through scenes together. She's actually talented, and I tell her so honestly. She has good timing and can make the emotional moments feel real. She admits one night that she was jealous of my spring show success, but now she's focused on her own performance rather than competing with mine. I appreciate the honesty and tell her I'm glad she's doing her own thing. We work through the script multiple times, and by the week before the show, she has most of it memorized. I go to opening night with Dad and Lorraine and watch Chloe shine on stage. She's genuinely good and the audience loves her. Dad and I maintain our Sunday morning walks throughout the fall and winter. That dedicated time keeps our relationship strong. We walk the same route through the neighborhood talking about everything and nothing. He tells me one cold morning in January that having that protected space with me made it easier for him to build a relationship with Chloe separately. He says he doesn't feel torn between us anymore because he has time with both of us individually. I'm glad he didn't sacrifice our bond to create the blended family. I tell him these walks matter to me and I'm happy we kept them. He puts his arm around my shoulders and says they matter to him too. By Christmas, our house feels genuinely peaceful most of the time. We have our established rhythms with some shared family activities and some separate traditions. Friday movie nights continue and we take turns picking films. Dad and I have our Sunday walks and monthly Romano's dinners. Chloe and Lorraine have their Saturday breakfast routine. We all come together for bigger things, but we also have our own spaces. On Christmas morning, we exchange gifts, and Chloe gives me a book by an author I mentioned liking months ago. I give her theater tickets to a show she wanted to see. The gifts show we actually pay attention to each other's interests. It's not the sister relationship either of us imagined when she first moved in, but it works for us. Our January check-in with Lila fell on a cold Tuesday afternoon exactly 1 year after Chloe first moved in. We all sat in her office in our usual spots, though the tension that used to fill the room had mostly disappeared. Lila started by asking us to reflect on the past 12 months and what we'd learned. Dad went first and talked about how he'd assumed everyone would naturally adjust to being a family, without realizing he needed to actively create space for different relationships. He said he learned that protecting individual bonds doesn't threaten the family unit. It actually strengthens it. Lorraine admitted she'd pushed too hard for instant bonding because she wanted Chloe to feel secure, but that pressure made things worse instead of better. She said she learned that belonging can't be forced or rushed. Chloe spoke next, and her voice was quieter than it used to be when she talked about family stuff. She said she'd been so focused on claiming her place that she didn't think about respecting the space that already existed. She learned that you can't demand to be treated like family. You have to earn it through actual connection and respect. When it was my turn, I talked about how I'd learned to stand up for myself without being cruel about it. I said the retaliation phase taught me that hurting someone back doesn't actually fix anything. It just creates more problems. Lila nodded and made notes while we talked. Then she asked what we'd do differently if we could start over. Dad said he'd establish clear boundaries from day one instead of hoping things would work themselves out. Lorraine said she'd give everyone more time and space to adjust naturally. Chloe said she'd ask permission and respect existing relationships instead of trying to take over everything. I said I'd speak up about my needs earlier instead of letting resentment build until I exploded. Lila smiled and closed her notebook. She told us she was officially graduating us from regular therapy sessions. She said we'd built strong communication skills and healthy boundaries, and she was confident we could maintain our progress without weekly guidance. She reminded us that her door was always open if we needed tune-up sessions, but she believed we had the tools to handle normal family conflicts on our own now. We all thanked her and filed out of her office for the last time as required attendees. Looking back on the whole year, I realized the conflict taught me things I probably couldn't have learned any other way. I learned that standing up for yourself matters, but so does being willing to meet people halfway once they show they're trying. I learned that family isn't just about blood or legal papers. It's about mutual respect and genuine care. Chloe learned that belonging isn't something you can force or steal. It has to grow naturally through trust and consideration. She learned that trying to replace someone or claim their exact position never works. You have to find your own space. Dad and Lorraine learned that blending families takes actual work and honest communication, not just hope and good intentions. They learned that acknowledging differences and protecting individual relationships makes the whole family stronger, not weaker. All of us learned that conflict isn't always bad if you work through it honestly instead of pretending everything is fine. The hard conversations we had in therapy were awful in the moment, but they cleared the air and let us build something real instead of fake. By spring of our junior year, Chloe and I had developed a rhythm that worked for us. We weren't best friends and probably never would be, but we genuinely cared about each other's lives and well-being. When she came home excited about getting was accepted to a competitive summer internship at a local theater company, I felt actually happy for her. I hugged her and told her she deserved it because she'd worked hard on her audition. When I stressed about SAT prep and spent hours at the kitchen table with practice tests, she brought me snacks without me asking. She'd set down a plate of crackers and cheese or some fruit, then leave me alone to study. Those small gestures meant more than big dramatic moments because they showed we thought about each other in normal, everyday ways. We still had our own separate friend groups and activities, which felt healthy rather than divisive. She had her theater crowd and I had my academic competition team. We'd pass each other in the hallways at the school and smile or wave, but we weren't attached at the hip. Some weekends we barely saw each other because we were both busy with our own stuff. Other weekends we'd end up watching movies together or helping each other with homework. It was easy and natural instead of forced. Our blended family wasn't perfect or picture perfect like the ones you see in TV shows. We still had awkward moments and occasional tension when someone's boundaries got tested. But it was real, and it worked for us in a way that felt sustainable. We'd all grown and adapted, learning to share space and resources while keeping our individual identities intact. I was proud of how we'd fought through the hard parts, instead of giving up or letting resentment poison everything. I was genuinely happy with the family we'd built together through all those difficult conversations and compromises. Dad and I still had our Sunday morning walks and monthly Romano's dinners, just the two of us. Chloe and Lorraine had their Saturday breakfast tradition, but we also had Friday movie nights and holiday celebrations as a complete family unit. The balance felt right. Some days were still awkward or tense when old patterns tried to resurface, but most days we were just a normal family figuring things out as we went, making mistakes and fixing them, supporting each other through regular life stuff. That was enough.